Dr. Aysha Akhtar is a double board-certified neurologist and preventive medicine and public health specialist on a mission. She is demonstrating how there is a mutual benefit to both humans and animals when animals are protected. She is the author of the upcoming book, Our Symphony with Animals, on health, empathy, and shared destinies.
Actually, it's out.
It is already out?
Yes.
Didn't I pre-order it? I think I did.
You did.
Her prior book, Animals in Public Health, Why Treating Animals Better is Critical to Human Welfare, examines how the treatment of animals impacts human health. In her TED Talk, which you should totally watch, she discusses how treating animals better is not only good for animals, but also good for us. Dr. Akhtar has spoken and written extensively on the connection between animal protection and human health. Please, let's give a warm welcome.
Thanks, Adrienne. Okay. I'm going to start off. This is a picture of the two loves of my life. And I took this photo. So yes, I know my husband Patrick's head is cut off. But can you blame me? I mean, look at the focus of this picture. This little guy, Silo's my baby. He is the feline love of my life. And I absolutely love him. And I absolutely love all animals. And we all do. And you might say that, yeah, Aysha, that's because we here tend to be animal people. But in fact, it's part of our biology. In the 1980s, biologist Edward Wilson had introduced the word biophilia, which means a love of life in its simplest definition. And it describes the innate human desire to connect with all other living things. And that includes insects, and that includes plants and trees. But it's in our relationships with animals where our biophilia is especially evident. So 3/4 of American households now include animals as part of their families. And our language is changing to reflect our newfound relationship with these animals. They are no longer our pets, and we are no longer so much their owners, but they are our babies. We are their sisters, their brothers, their moms, their dads. And this trend is increasing worldwide. And when we can't bring animals into our homes, we seek them elsewhere. We join bird watching clubs, we visit wildlife sanctuaries, we go on safaris in Africa. And even though I personally intensely dislike animals in circuses and animals in zoos, the very reason why they existed in the first place is because we have this innate curiosity. We want to be around other animals. In fact, our desire to connect with animals is so strong that our biology isn't just biophilia, it's animalphilia. And I'll go even further. I know it's very hard to believe at times, but we have an innate desire, an innate capacity to empathize with animals and with all animals. And we see it come out from time to time, sometimes in the most unlikely of people and in the most unlikely of situations. We will see people who will go out of their way or risk their lives to help animals they never may have thought of before, to help those animals in need. And it doesn't matter, there we go. It doesn't matter how dangerous the situation is. Like this boy who waited a flood to save this deer. It doesn't matter who the animal is, like these folks who are rescuing this pig stranded on top of a rooftop after a hurricane. And it doesn't matter how small the animal is. These firefighters rescued and are giving oxygen to a hamster. It doesn't matter if we're young or old, and if we live in the White House, except in this case, right? Or if we live in no house. Animals capture our hearts, our imagination, and our wonder like no one else can. So now I'm a neurologist, and I'm asking myself, where does this empathy for animals come from? And how does it affect our well-being? In 1946, the World Health Organization had described health as more than just the absence of disease. They described health as a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being. In other words, health draws from all aspects of our lives. In a sense, each of us is like a connect-the-dot picture. In order to draw the right picture of health, we have to A, include all the relevant dots that make up our lives, and B, connect those dots in the right way. So in medicine, we know that how we govern ourselves, how we shelter ourselves, how we share or do not share our resources, how we relate to our environment, how we work, how we eat, how we play, in short, how we live influences our health. Despite knowing this, medicine has largely overlooked one crucial influence that has existed since our beginning: our relationships with animals. So I wanted to change this. So for 5 years, I traveled around the country gathering stories and looking at the science and the medicine. And I asked, how do our relationships with animals affect our physical, our mental, and our social well-being? Not just as individuals, but collectively, as a society. And specifically, I asked, what do we gain when we embrace empathy for animals, and what do we lose when we don't? So to start, studies show that just being with animals can boost our health in ways that we can physically measure. Petting caressing a cat or playing with a dog, even for 10 to 15 minutes, has shown to reduce our baseline heart rate, our cardiovascular rate, to reduce our blood pressure, and even reduce our cholesterol level. Now, I don't know how that works, but it's been shown. And these effects are cumulative. They accumulate over time that can actually increase our lifespan. And I know that many of you have felt this, right? When you walk through your front door at the end of a stressful day at work or at school, and your critter runs up to greet you, don't you just immediately feel your blood pressure dropping, right? And animals actually can boost positive neurochemicals in our brains as well. Neurochemicals that help us feel good. They help us make us more social. Neurochemicals like dopamine and oxytocin. And studies are showing that we can also boost the same neurochemicals in the animals. So there's a mutual benefit to these kind, respectful, loving relationships with animals. Now, the effects that animals have on us go beyond those that we can physically measure. This is Dr. Boris Levinson, and I apologize, it's the best photo I can find of him. He was a psychologist, and in the late 1950s, he made what was at that time a startling revelation. He was asked by a very desperate mother to see a young boy. Now, this boy had stopped talking about 8 months prior and had become withdrawn. And the mother had dragged the boy to psychologists, to therapists, everyone, and no one could get through to the boy. So as a last-ditch effort, Dr. Levinson agreed to see the boy. Now, Levinson happened to be an animal lover, and he used to rescue dogs and cats. And he used to keep in his office some of his dogs with him, especially his dog Jingles. And when the boy first arrived for his first visit, Jingles was there at the office. And when the boy walked in, Jingles did what Jingles often did. Jingles ran to the boy, and he licked his face. And this is when Dr. Levinson saw something that surprised him. Because rather than shirking from the dog, as Levinson expected the boy to do, instead the boy wrapped his arms around the dog, and he said the first words he had uttered in a year. And he said hello to the dog. And Levinson noticed that the boy continued to improve in the dog's presence. And he noticed this with many children and with many different types of animals. And he actually suggested that animals can be co-therapists. He's not the first psychologist to notice that. Dr. Freud noted that as well. Dr. Freud loved his dog, Jofi, and he used to bring Jofi into his office when he was seeing patients to help him, Freud, relax when he was seeing patients. And he quickly saw how Jofi's presence helped his patients open up, relax, and talk about themselves. So what many psychologists have seen is that animals tend to provide a comfort and a companionship that's unique. And that's because they're not humans. And thank God for that. They help us to step away from the human-generated pressures from our lives. I love my mom. I love her. She loves me. But we tick each other off. I don't have that kind of relationship with Silos, my cat. I never get really stressed out about Silos. Not the way I can with other human beings. So animals, they diffuse that pressure, that stress in our lives. And they can help us, even some of us who've faced the greatest of hardships, to look beyond those hardships, look beyond the disappointments and the cruelties that we may face in our lives, and to It re-engaged with the beauty and the joys in the world. This little guy is being tickled. This is a rat. And do you guys know that rats love being tickled? They actually emit ultrasonic chirping noises. They laugh when they are tickled. So this little guy, there's videos you can find online. Now this is just a photo. This isn't even the video. It's just a photo. You just see this little guy with his little feet and hands up in the air. He's cute, isn't he? He's so cute. And knowing that he's experiencing joy in this moment, I can look around the room and I can see almost everyone had a smile on their face. That's your empathy, because you wouldn't have that. You wouldn't feel anything for this rat. You wouldn't experience that smile if you didn't have that empathy in the first place. And so it's just a photo, just for a brief moment, but for that brief moment, you experience joy and empathy because of this little guy. Now, in addition to teaching us joy, animals can teach us empathy itself, even among the most hardened and violent of men and women. This is the Ohio State Hospital for the Criminally Insane, and it was built in Lima, Ohio, I always forget which one, in 1902, and it is the second largest poured concrete structure in the world after the Pentagon. It's also one of the nation's most notorious penal institutions in American history. For years and decades after it was built, rumors spread about the incredibly cruel treatment of the inmates here. There were suspicious suicides, pregnant women were being beaten, there were sexual violations, there were lots of beatings for things that were just ridiculous, for the most minor of infractions. And it wasn't until 3 reporters went undercover and did a 2-month investigation that they brought to light what was going on at this institution. And that led to a litany of reforms. And pretty soon, there was one reform in particular that really captured nationwide attention. And pretty soon, reporters from ABC News, Time Magazine, and 60 Minutes were flocking to the institution not to report on the cruel treatment of the inmates, but to report on the work of this guy. This is David Lee. He was a social worker at the institution. Now, David had animals. He had grown up with animals most of his life. And knowing how animals had brightened his life, he decided to try something at the institution. This was back in the 1970s. And he wondered if bringing animals into some of the wards would brighten the lives of the inmates. So what he did is he started with a 60-day trial period. So for 60 days, he brought animals in 2 wards that housed some of the most suicidal and depressed inmates. And what he did is he brought fish in aquarium and birds. And he compared the progress of the inmates on these 2 wards with the progress of inmates on 2 other wards that were identical in every other way, identical in the mood and the state of the inmates, except they did not include animals. And almost immediately, David noticed results. So once the animals were brought in, these guys were flocking to take care of these animals, and they were begging to take care of these animals. And pretty soon, when visitors came, they would rush to visitors and say, "Come on, you have to come meet my fish and meet my birds." And soon, they were talking. Not only, these were inmates who, some of them had not uttered a word or barely uttered a word the entire time they'd been there at the institution, were suddenly talking not only to the animals, but also to each other about the animals. And after 60 days, the results were irrefutable. On the 2 wards where the animals were brought in, the inmates were able to cut their medication use by half, they had far fewer violent outbreaks, and they had no suicide attempts. In the comparison wards, the inmates stayed on the same high level of medication, same high level of violent outbreaks, and they had 8 suicide attempts during those 2 months. So with this success, David then expanded the program not only to many of the other wards inside, but also outside. Now, this was the first successful animal therapy program, first documented successful animal therapy program at a prison institution. And this program led to what we now see in so many prison institutions today and elsewhere. And you have to understand, these were men and women, there were some women here at the institution, who were convicted of very violent crimes, like rape, murder, child abuse, domestic violence, armed robbery. And they were telling the reporters that they were learning kindness, they were learning how to be gentle, they were learning how to diffuse their anger for the first time with these animals. They were learning how to empathize with others through these animals. And some of the inmates bonded so strongly with some of these animals. They bonded incredibly strongly. There was one guy who bonded really strongly with a group of angelfish. Now, he would put his hand in the tank, and the angelfish would swim up to his hand. But they would only swim up to his hand, not to anyone else's. Now, when this guy successfully rehabilitated, and when it was time for him to go to a much, much better place, he actually refused to go unless he could take the fish with him. And the good news is that wish was granted. And then other folks started to make the same demand, like this guy who bonded really strongly with this feline. And he got his wish granted that he got to go home with this cat. Many of these inmates had the same request. And pretty soon, what was really great is that David started to bring in animals who were in need of rescue. So animals who were homeless, animals who had injuries, so that the inmates felt that they were helping the animals just as the animals were helping them. Now, just as empathy can be learned, it can also be unlearned. Despite this innate human empathy that we have for animals, we can just as easily squash it. And we can cause incredible cruelty to animals. How does that happen? So for the middle part of my book, I wanted to explore this. In order to be complete about our relationship with animals, I had to explore this side as well. So I started with an extreme. This is Keith Jesperson. He's also known as the Happy Face Killer. He's serving life at the Oregon State Penitentiary for murdering 8 women. Now, it's pretty common knowledge that serial killers like Jesperson often start out by abusing animals, hurting animals as well. But what's not really studied, there's very little information about this, is why. Is it just because it's more convenient to hurt animals, or are there other things? How does that cruelty start in the first place? So I wanted to explore this. So I spent a year talking on the phone, weekly phone calls with Jesperson, frequent letters, and then ultimately I went to visit him for 2 days at the penitentiary. And despite the fact that Jesperson had caused immense suffering in countless numbers of animals, as well as those women, he also had some profound moments of empathy. And I was so floored, because I expected kind of a more black and white picture with Jesperson. I thought this was an extreme serial killer. He's known violence all his life, but that's not what I got. He had empathy for animals. He didn't come out of the womb not caring about others and not caring about animals. It was especially there when he was a child, especially towards a dog and several animals that he tried to rescue as a child. But ultimately, that innate, inherent empathy was squashed by his surrounding culture, which was his neighbors, his friends, his family, and especially his father. And I won't spoil the surprise, but Jesperson, in a very public way, came out to recognize and acknowledge how his learning to be cruel to animals and squashing that gentleness that he had made it had a significant influence in who he became as an adult and the murder of those 8 women. Now, Jesperson, as I mentioned, is an extreme case, right? Most abuse of animals links not with the serial killers in the world, but with more everyday crimes, the more normal crimes, as I learned as I spent 4 days riding along with the New York Police Department. So this is me in a very oversized bulletproof vest. As long as it stayed on, then I felt that I was okay. So it turns out that the NYPD is ahead of its time. Now, they have the nation's first ever squad of detectives focused solely on investigating crimes against animals. And they have a triad, actually, a strong legal enforcement arm, a strong forensics arm, and then a strong policing arm as well. Now, the NYPD knows what the studies show. They know that the same people who tend to have been found to have abused animals are the people who end up being arrested for crimes like armed robbery, again, domestic violence, child abuse, human trafficking, you name it. And the link is so strong and so irrefutable that the FBI had made recent changes now in how it tracks animal abuse. So a few years ago, or in the past, the FBI used to put animal abuse in the other category, meaning that they really didn't track it very well and they didn't get very good data on animal abuse. But a few years ago, knowing how strong this link is, the FBI moved animal abuse up to category A, which means that they now can track animal abuse the way it does murder. Now, these are significant, tremendous changes, this recognition by both the NYPD and the FBI between this link, this violence against animals and violence against humans link. But despite this, there's still something that the FBI and the NYPD are missing, right? Because most abuse against animals doesn't happen by rogue killers like Jesperson or by violent spouses, but most abuse against animals occurs at the hands of our industries and our government. Fur farms, factory farms, laboratories, puppy mills, you name it. And these are photos that I took from some tours in Oklahoma at some of the farms. These places are hidden from our view precisely because they confront our natural empathy for animals. So as a society, we have told our government and our industries, go ahead and hurt animals, we'll just look the other way. But we don't stop there. We have to think the other way as well. Words matter. Words don't just reflect how we think, they influence how we think. So, to further squash our empathy for animals, we've changed our language. And what we've done is we've divided animals into separate categories. So animals aren't just animals, but now they're fur animals, they're food animals, they're laboratory animals, companion animals, wild animals. And studies show that just as one word, the one label that we attach, can significantly affect our empathy for animals. And it describes the narrative that we give to those animals. So if I'm talking to someone about a companion cat, the story that comes to mind is this is a cat to be taken care of, a cat to be cherished. If, on the other hand, I'm talking about a laboratory cat, the story that comes to mind is, well, this cat was bred to have her spinal cord crushed and to have electrodes implanted in her brain. But sometimes what we're finding now, and more, is that even these labels, this different categorization, isn't working. We're learning more and more about who these animals are. So to further remove who these animals are from us, we now slice and dice them into their parts. So chickens, turkeys, pigs, cows becomes thighs, nuggets, wings, bacon, ribs. Or we rename animals altogether. In laboratories, animals are called tools, systems, preparations, and models. So our truths about animals are a creation of language. We've separated animals into different categories, we've cut animals into their parts, and we reduce animals into abstractions, all to ease our conscience. Does it really work? And as with individual forms of violence against animals, when we allow these industrialized forms against animal abuse to occur, does that come back to hurt us? Well, for a long time, sociologists had noticed that when a slaughterhouse moves into town, there's a rapid rise in crimes. Much of it is perpetrated by the slaughterhouse employees themselves. And sociologists would come up with different reasons for why there was this increase in crimes. And they would say it was because of the dangerous nature of the work, which is true, or the very poor treatment of the slaughterhouse workers, which is also true. But one sociologist had a different idea. And she wondered if the act of killing hundreds and sometimes thousands of animals a day could play a role. Can you imagine no one else thought to ask this question before? So this is Dr. Fitzgerald, and what she did is she looked at 600 counties in the US, and she looked at the counties where there were slaughterhouses, and she got the data on their crime rates, and she compared those counties with counties where there were no slaughterhouses, but there were industries that were similar in the way the employees were treated and in the dangerous nature of the work. And she looked at their crime rates. What do you think she found? She found an absolute association between crime and slaughterhouses that was not there with the other industries. She especially found a very significant association between slaughterhouses and increased violence against women and children. And in a sense, that kind of makes sense, right? Many of the slaughterhouse workers became desensitized to the more powerless, to the animals and then to the women and children. And Dr. Fitzgerald did find an association between violence against women and children with the steel industry, but a negative one. In other words, the steel industry was associated with a decrease in these crimes. So what her study strongly suggests, is that violence against animals, even in this routinized, legalized, industrialized, normalized way, does spill over into the larger society. This is called spillover violence. So what it strongly suggests is that hurting animals, even in these ways, does come back to hurt us. But the good news is that the studies, brain imaging studies, and other studies that show us how we squash empathy for animals also give us clues as to how to regain that empathy. And what we're seeing is that we're more likely to empathize with others, and this includes other humans or animals. We're more likely to empathize with those who are more like us, who are physically nearer to us, and who we are just more familiar with. So what's incredibly important is not only to show people the suffering that animals endure in these institutional practices, but to also show who these animals are at their best. And this is a great way to get people to start seeing this whole link, is to show these wonderful videos of rats being tickled, of mice showing empathy, and hens stretching their wings to protect their chicks from the rain. And the more people become familiar with who these animals are, and the more people see that these animals are like us in the ways that matter, the more our empathy, collective empathy for animals, will grow. And even people who may have suppressed that empathy and where it's been hidden deep down as a kernel deep within, it can reemerge. As it did for Stephen Peterson. Stephen was a deer hunter all his life, and he never once questioned his practice until one day he found himself crawling across a frozen river to rescue this little deer who was trapped in a hole in the middle of the frozen river. That empathy emerged for the first time in James Giuliani. James was a mobster for the Gambino family. He lived a life of violence and selfishness, a raging drug and alcohol addict. Didn't care about animals, saw them as dirty nuisances, never saw any point for animals being in this world, until one day he came across an abused dog. And what happened was that it caused a surge in what's called empathetic anger. James felt anger on behalf of this dog. And that newfound empathy that he didn't have before, utterly transformed his life. James has been drug and alcohol free for more than a decade now, and he now devotes his life to rescuing animals, like this little guy here, and going around the country and teaching people kindness towards animals. And that empathy emerged for the first time in Tommy and Renee King Sonnen, a cattle rancher, former cattle rancher and cattle rancher's wife down in the heartland of Texas. Now, what they would do is that they had cattle that they bred, and they did it for supplemental income for their retirement. And they never really thought about these cows. And they would breed the cows, and then their babies, the babies that were produced, and they would sell the babies off either for slaughter or to other people who would breed them further. But one day, Renee was asked to feed a sickly calf. And so she started hand feeding this cow with a bottle, this little baby cow. And as she said, once she did that, it was like she went through a rabbit hole. And she came out and she started seeing these animals as individuals. And she noticed for the first time that when the trailer came, the next time when the trailer came to take the babies away, the moms were screaming, the moms were crying, and the moms would follow the trailer out along the fence line as far as they could go as the trailer was taking their babies away from them. And then Renee started asking, how can we do this? What is going on? And it just, this newfound empathy that awakened in her led to her and Tommy transforming this cattle ranch into the first ever sanctuary from a former cattle ranch. And now the sanctuary is home to beautiful animals like this guy. This is Pepper, very photogenic goat. The sanctuary is home to these guys. Now, the cow on the left is Charger. He's a little junior. I'd say he's like the equivalent of a 12-year-old human being. I was there when Charger first arrived at the sanctuary, and I'd never seen anything like this before. So Charger came from a family they were part of this student agricultural program, and they couldn't bear to see Charger being sold off and killed. So they brought Charger to the sanctuary. And Charger came after about a 2 or 3 hour ride, and so he stepped out on wobbly legs when he got off the trailer into the sanctuary. And he started, he was looking around at what was going to be his new home. It was a strange place to him, and he started to kind of moo tentatively. It was more like moo, moo, like a question mark. And then as he became a little more confident, he started to moo more loudly. And then I saw, as Charger was mooing, from the outer pastures, you could hear the other cows mooing back. And then one by one, they came out from the trees. And I am not exaggerating this. This is one of the most beautiful things I'd ever seen. These cows came up, and they literally lined up along this fence and touched nose to nose with Charger in greeting. We never see these things about cows. I didn't know this about cows. It was such a beautiful sight. So now this is home for Charger, as well as these other beautiful cows. And the sanctuary is home for Gizmo. Gizmo, who was initially the project of a student, an agricultural student, who fell in love with Gizmo and couldn't bear to see Gizmo being slaughtered. So what I'm trying to say is that we can show people how to re-engage with that empathy for animals. And I promise you this, the human empathy for animals will continue to grow. It is the natural progression of our species. And we can help it to grow and to grow faster by showing others how intricately our lives are linked with the lives of other animals, even those hidden from our view. And it's important to show people that our well-being is not separate from the well-being of animals. It's quite the opposite. We share the same destinies. Humans and animals largely share the same struggle, the need for safety, comfort, and a gentle hand. The good news is that the solution to our struggles is the same. Empathy for animals is the inevitable extension of our empathy for each other. So moving forward, how we want to be with animals will depend on how willing we are to be with them, not as master and servant, not as predator and prey, but as family, as partners, and as friends. And by doing so, we lose absolutely nothing. But what we gain is tremendous. What we gain when we embrace our kinship with animals is our health, our happiness, our humanity. And we gain friendships that are irreplaceable. Thank you all very much. Here's my contact info. If any of you guys ever have any questions or just want to reach out and say hello, I'm always happy to hear from people.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That was terrific. So we do have time for question and answer. A little housekeeping on that. I will keep the time for question and answer, so don't worry about that. I know how much time we have. We've got about 15 minutes. I'll come around. I'll hand you the mic. Please speak into the mic. Even if you can project or you have follow-up questions, the reason we want it in the mic is for the purpose of the recording. So please do that. And the final note, you may have heard me say this already once today, but please ask a question, form your question in the form of a question. I know that presentations like this and being at VegFest can cause you to have a lot of feelings and maybe have things that you want to talk about or you want to process with a friend or a loved one, and that's great. We definitely want to encourage that kind of thought, but Q&A is not the time for it. So definitely give her questions. We'd love to hear them. I'm going to come around. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
All right.
Oh, and can I mention one quick thing? Yeah. So I'm going to be just right outside a book signing right out, and all the profits are going to animal organizations, animal protection organizations.
Yeah,
Thanks.
we'll do that. We'll do that right after the Q&A.
Hi, I see a lot of people who have an enormous amount of empathy for companion animals, like say just dogs or cats, but that empathy doesn't apply to all species. So do you have any suggestions or have you done any research into how we sort of apply that across the board?
Yeah, so one thing is it's incredibly crucial, as much as we can, to try to break down that language, to break down that the labels. So when I talk about animals in agriculture, for example, I don't say farm animals. I say animals in farms. And you'll be surprised at what a difference that can make in how we think about animals. They are more than just being farm animals. They are more than just being laboratory animals. They are animals in laboratories. So that's one thing that we can all start doing, is be cognizant of the language that we use. The other thing truly is, and this is something that's really great, because no one wants to see horrible videos and pictures. I don't want to see them. No one wants to see them. So one way of getting through to people is showing those really nice videos of animals. It's really crucial. Show them pigs. Show them images of pigs snuggling up with their human companions, or having these friendships with goats, and just showing them the good side of these animals and how alike us they are in that way, in their capacity to love and have friendships and just enjoy life. So I say I'm not a huge fan of social media. I'm just from an older generation, but in this case, social media is great, and spread those videos and those photos of these really nice, positive videos and photos of these animals.
I have a question over here.
Yeah.
Hey, I have a question for you. Can you address speciesist language? Because right now we have so much speciesism going on, especially in the media, when they use speciesist, like they don't have a dog in that fight, they don't have a horse in that race, that kind of stuff. And I see a lot of vegans using speciesist language, so I wanted you to address that so people can kind of be aware of what they're saying. Sometimes they don't really know what they're saying, actually.
Yeah, so, one of the phrases I hear a lot is, killing two birds with one stone, for example. I know we all hear it. It's horrible. Where did the idea come from? So there was a book that came out with all these nice different ways of kind of rephrasing of these popular phrases, and I don't remember what it was, but it was like one was saving two birds with one hand, for example, instead of killing two birds with one stone. And some of them may be kind of dorky and all that, but what's really important is for us just to when we see that language, even. Most of us don't think about it. Even for those of us who care about animals, we've grown up with it. It's just knee-jerk reaction. We just don't think about the language we're using. So politely just suggest, hey, maybe instead of killing birds with two stones, maybe saving two birds with one hand, maybe a nicer way of putting it, or something like that. And with media as well, and we see a lot with media. We see animals being referred to as it all the time. And that immediately squashes our empathy. So that's another thing, is to be cognizant, not to say, to make sure we're using the proper pronouns and so on when we're talking about animals. He or she is not an it. So the more we change our language, it will change with the people around you, and it will spread. That's how it works. And if you see that in the media, give a gentle reminder and a correction, a nice letter or something. Say, hey, it'd be nice if you started to stop referring to animals as it. They are not inanimate objects. They are living, breathing beings.
I have a question in the back. I did want to say there's a really terrific vegan cookbook that the focus of the book is obviously amazing recipes, but each page has like a rewriting of those old-fashioned statements. So if I can, like the two birds with, if I can remember what cookbook that is, or when I get home, I'll look that up and I'll see if we can publish that out on our social media, because I know you'd love to hear some of those phrases, and I also know you'd love to get some of those recipes.
Thanks, Adrian.
Thank you, Doctor. Is it Dr. Akhtar?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Very, very uplifting. And I just want to tell you that. The other thing I wanted to ask you about, you said this quote that just blew both of us away. It was, for animals not to be treated nor master or servant, nor predator or prey. Mm-hmm. What was the rest of that? We were trying to write that down.
Let's see. Well, I know you're recording these, so I said something like, how willing we are to be with animals will depend on how willing we are to be with them, not as master or servant or predator or prey, but as friends, as family, and as partners.
Yeah.
That's my quote, yeah. It's my quote, it's in my book. And if you forget it or something, you can just reach out to me and I can send it to you.
And we are recording as many of the talks as we can, and we're seeking rights to publish them on our YouTube channel, as we try to do every year. So hopefully they'll also be online for y'all. I have a question for you as I walk around. I think I see a couple others. So one of the reasons I was so inspired by your talk last time and wanted you to come back and speak again is you talked a lot about the dangerous ways that factory farms, they hurt all of us.
Right.
And I was just wondering if you could maybe give a little preview to some of the content from your previous talk or your previous book, and just kind of just say a little bit more in that direction, whether about the science, the epidemiology, just anything in that category of information that might be compelling to this audience.
Sure, and this is the subject of a quick 15-minute TED Talk I did. It's called Do Animals Hold the Key to Your Health? And if you go on my website, it's there, or if you just Google my name, you'll probably see the video come up. So I talk a lot about, I worked a lot in the Office of Counterterrorism and Emerging Threats at the Food and Drug Administration, and we deal with what we call emerging threats, which are these new infectious diseases or diseases happening in places where they don't normally happen, these infectious diseases spreading to other places. So things like Ebola, the Zika virus, and what most people don't realize is the most dangerous of all is the little good old-fashioned flu virus. It is actually the most deadliest of all the viruses out there because it has a tremendous ability to spread easily because it's airborne. It gets airborne very quickly, and we spread it very easily. And so what many people don't realize is that factory farms is one of the biggest instigators of the mutation of the flu virus. Flu viruses are mutating over and over again at a rate we've never seen before in factory farms. And these flu viruses are transforming in the pigs and the chickens to become deadlier, to become easier to spread. And then and I know you guys have seen many of these, you hear about these outbreaks at these chicken and pig farms throughout the country, and then they go and kill all the animals in just as horribly bad ways as any other way you can imagine. And, they may squash the outbreak for a while. We have been incredibly lucky because most of these flu viruses that have come out yet have not been the kind to quite yet be deadly and incredibly contagious among humans. But the flu virus is something we share with pigs and other chickens. We can spread it among each other. So factory farms they're like incubators for the flu virus. I mean, if I were to create the best laboratory for creating a new deadly strain of the influenza virus, it would be a factory farm. And this is one of the things I talk about, as well as the poisoning of our land and our water that's coming about from the factory farms themselves. So factory farms are more than even the climate change. They are instigators, they are propellers of infectious diseases, as well as they create asthma in the surrounding neighborhoods and poisoning of our land and our water supplies as well. But as I mentioned, that's a topic of my TED Talk, Do Animals Hold the Key to Your Health?
All right, we have time for a couple more questions. I need this one and then head over that way.
Hi, sorry, I came in late, so hopefully this wasn't already covered. In referring to seeing how animals, humans and animals are connected, I was wondering about the terminology of saying humans and animals as opposed to saying human animals and non-human animals, and what is the justification for one over the other?
Yeah. This is one of those hard ones because honestly, we're all animals, and we just so like to put ourselves up on a pedestal as though we're something different. We like to think there's rational beings. We're not really that rational. We've shown again and again that we are emotional creatures fundamentally. We make our decisions based on emotion primarily, and then intellect may come. But usually, if our emotions are already in line with what we're thinking. So you're absolutely right. And I know a lot of people, linguists, and people far smarter than me have tried to come up with ways to try to do this, because it gets cumbersome when we say non-human animals or the other phrases that people have come up with. But you're right, and thank you for pointing that out. It's one thing that I should be more cognizant about as well, and that's another thing that we can all do a little bit more, is at least, even if it is a little bit more wordy, to start saying non-human animals a little bit more to show that we are very much connected.
All right, I think this will be our last question, and then we'll head out to the lobby for our book signing and further conversation. I did want to ask if people want to keep the conversation going with you, if they have more questions. Are you around the rest of the day, and is this the best way to get in touch with you?
This is the best way to get in touch with me. Unfortunately, after the book signing, I have to take off and go to the airport and fly back home. But I am always, like I said, I love hearing from people. So I will respond to your emails. If you're nice, if you're polite, I'll respond to your email.
It's true. She responded to mine.
Thank you. It was an amazing talk. Can you comment? So in 2014, you successfully freaked me out in a good way with talk about Ebola and the pig population in the Philippines. And of course, last year, we started seeing stuff about that in the news. I don't know if you've had a chance to do this because I know you're on your book tour. Have you had a chance to look at the stuff that's shown up in The Guardian about African swine fever and the pigs in China? Because I'm getting a little freaked out about that at this point.
No, I have not. But what Priya is talking about is this is a subject of my prior book and I think part of my TED Talk as well. But there was in a farm. So Ebola, the way the Ebola strain is, the reason why it's not as deadly as it could be. It's a deadly virus in those who get it, but it's not easily contagious, right? Because it's not airborne. You have to get it through the bodily contact, through bodily fluids, infected bodily fluids. But in, I don't remember if it was 2013, 2014, investigators found a strain in pigs in Thailand, an Ebola in pigs in Thailand, that was actually contagious through the air. And they were spreading it among themselves. And what they found was that there was I have to remember the information, there was something about, the Ebola had some ability to recognize and to cling on to, I can't remember, something in the human nose as well. So basically what it meant is that it could become something that is airborne and something airborne and contagious among humans as well. Now, I don't know where these new new strains and outbreaks, or if they're connected with that or not. I'd be really surprised if that just died down, because strains, the thing about viruses is that they're born, in a sense, they're born and they die at a rate we can't even imagine. They far outpace us. So we're always playing catch up with these viruses, always playing catch up with these viruses. So the viruses are always 1, 2, 3, maybe 10,000 steps ahead of us. So I would expect that virus is still lingering somewhere, and maybe it is playing a role in some of these new strains that we're seeing. I don't know for sure, though. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, we're going to head out to the book signing now. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.